Good afternoon. In absence of a quorum, we're going to start as a subcommittee today. So my name is Steve Bradford, Chair of Utilities and Commerce Committee, and we're going to call this April 4th meeting to order of the Utilities and Commerce. First, a little point of order. I'm just going to make some announcements. The following bills are Arthur pulls from today's hearing and will not be heard. AB 2213, Fuentes. AB 2296, Saldana. AB 2514, Skinner. AB 2662, Hagman. AB 2724, Blumenfield, and AB 2737, Block. The bills will be heard in sign-in order, and the first bill will be AB 2037. Mr. Perez, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Perez.
Appreciate this opportunity to present AB 2037. Current law does not prohibit a domestic utility company from importing power from power plants sited out of state in locations that do not conform to our state's strong air quality standards. Air emissions produced by power generation plants on the other side of the California border create negative impacts on the air quality in the adjacent air basin airsheds, affecting public health and the quality of life for the residents of the region. The Imperial Valley has one of the worst particulate matter pollution problems in California, as well as historically high rates of asthma hospitalizations among our children. This issue is compounded by a recent trend of power plants being sited in Mexico adjacent to the state and federal borders. AB 2037 is intended to address adverse air pollution impacts by only authorizing the approval of energy contracts to out-of-state power plants that meet California emissions and offset standards. Specifically, this bill would prohibit a load-serving entity or local publicly owned electric utility from entering into and would prohibit the PUC from approving for an electrical corporation a long-term financial commitment with or for a new electrical generation facility that does not meet California emissions and offset standards as determined by the local air pollution control districts and air quality management districts. Now, this is for any electrical generating facility constructed after January 1st of 2011. This bill has been narrowly drafted and addresses a very specific environmental concern and applies only to prospective additions. We've made a commitment to look at issues raised by opposition and to work with SEMPRA and others as this bill moves forward to carefully determine the most appropriate amendments to be adopted in the next committee. Mr. Bob Ham is here on behalf of the Imperial County, and so is Brendan Twahig with CAPCOA to help us out with any technical questions. And I appreciate this opportunity, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. Any questions by the committee members?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much. You mentioned that there was some discussions going on with the utilities about some inadvertent consequences of the bill. Did you want to elaborate on that a little more, particularly as it relates to the question of long-term contracts?
Sure.
For renewable, since that seemed to be...
I can speak to that, and I'll let others speak to that as well. But the issue here is dealing with renewable energy when it comes to that. And the concern is that this would also impact renewable energy facilities on the other side of the border. We received amendments that were offered to us on last week or 2 weeks ago on Thursday, and we haven't had an opportunity to review all that entirely. Right? But I'm open to continuing that conversation with those entities, and I'm not sure if Mr. Ham or Brendan would like to Brendan would like to speak to that as well.
Mr. Chairman, Assemblyman Swanson, Bob Ham with the County of Imperial. First of all, I'm glad to be here and not in Calexico today. But we have a little concern about distinguishing between renewables and regular fossil generation when it comes to our responsibility. The county board sits also as the local air pollution control district. The EPA, the U.S. EPA, has found us non-attainment for a number of constituents that come out of these power plants that are in Mexicali. Unfortunately, once they get into this, they're in the same airshed. When they get into our measurement area, the EPA does not look at what the source is. We'd like to say all of the pollution transported in from Mexico, we should not be responsible for it because we have no control over it. However, in this restricted instance, we might get some control over it if they were just required, whether it be fossil or whether it be renewable. If it's pollution, it's pollution. There's no such thing as greener pollution than other pollution. When it gets here, if it's a NOx and it mixes in our atmosphere, we're responsible for finding a solution for it. And we'd like to ask the legislature to say if they're going to build it for export into California, at least meet the same standard that you would meet if you were 3 miles north and in our county.
That's all.
Okay. Yes.
I don't have anything to add specifically on that, but just to make a general support statement, Brendan Tuig on behalf of the California Air Pollution Control Officers Association. We're the association of 35 executive officers from all the local and regional air districts in California, and we've taken a support position on the bill. The author has alluded to it, and also Mr. Ham, is the importance of, it's not right that you can have a power plant a few miles away and have a degradation of the air quality just a few miles away, and we think it's fair that from the outset that if folks are going to site a new plant, that they try to meet California standards, and we think this will help move that forward. So we urge your support of the bill.
Great. Is there any testimony in opposition of this bill? Before we get there, is there any more testimony in support of this bill?
That's me.
This in support. Okay, great.
Scared me.
I hate having to walk up under that pretense, but Will Gonzalez on behalf of the South Coast Air Quality Management District, we're in strong support of the bill. Thank you.
Excuse me, I'm going to interrupt you, Mr. Perez. I want to establish a quorum now, so Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Bradford.
Here.
Knight. Berry Hill. Buchanan. Carter. Fletcher. Fong. Fuentes. Fuller. Furutani. Huffman. Ma. Skinner. Swanson.
Present.
Valines.
A quorum is now being established, so Ms. Perez, please continue. Or Air Quality Board, please continue.
You want to continue, or you made your statement?
Is there any testimony in opposition of this bill? Please come forward. State your name, please.
Mr. Chair, members, my name is Brett Barrow at the California Municipal Utilities Association, and after some discussion with staff as well as reading the analysis and hearing Assemblyman Perez's opening remarks, we understand that this bill is specifically targeted to more towards out-of-country power plants, however, and that our major concerns may have been inadvertently captured. But I want to express those because we are here today in opposition unless amended due to these concerns. The first being all plants must be certified by the California Energy Commission. Existing law requires currently that only power plants 50 megawatts and above be certified by the Energy Commission, and we have built and will continue to build mini power plants 49 and below using the authorization of our local governing boards as well as the approval of the federal and state governments. Also renewable resources do not require certification by the California Energy Commission. We feel that certification would be somewhat duplicative and time-consuming. It would just add delays to resources that need to be brought on as quickly as possible. Our second concern is with the air quality district standards. These power plants, when they come online, and I know this applies to those constructed after 2011, when we construct a new plant, they must meet the most current back standards, the best available control technologies. We are worried that power plants have a long lifespan, decades, that spans for decades. And should a power plant find itself in a situation where the AQMD or the local air standards have changed or the federal or state standards have changed, and we need to renew a long-term contract or long-term financial agreement with that power plant, we could find ourselves in a situation we may not be able to do that. So with that said, we're willing to work with the author to mitigate some of these concerns, and look forward to doing that. So thank you very much.
Kelly Boyd on behalf of Southern California Edison. We have similar concerns to the municipal utilities. The application currently is statewide, and it would also apply to Arizona and Nevada as opposed to just out of country. So we'd like to work to clarify and narrow that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Is that all of our opposition? Okay. Mr. Perez, would you like to close at this point?
I just want to thank you for this opportunity, and I appreciate the concerns that are coming from the opposition. We'll continue to work with them as well, and we'll clarify some of that. And at the end of the day, this is something that I urge you to support. This is not only an environmental issue, it's a public health issue for all our residents throughout the state of California, even though it's specific to Imperial County. I think we need to lead by example. And if we're doing this throughout the state of California, I think it's important that we also create these type of standards in our border region. So I ask you for your aye vote.
Someone needs to move the bill.
Mr. Swanson.
And the bill goes from this committee to the floor?
No, I believe it will go towards natural resources.
Natural resources. So you're talking about having the conversation.
Sure, most definitely.
Between now and natural resources.
Most definitely, sir.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that.
Ms. Buchanan.
I'm prepared to vote for the bill to move it to natural resources because I do agree that that probably is the most appropriate committee, but I hope that you'll work with these different companies and organizations so that we have something that works for all of us.
No worries, Ms. Buchanan, and the rest of the members. Be rest assured that we will be working with folks. We have, and we look forward to continue to do that.
Has the bill been moved, Chair?
No, I guess Ms. Buchanan just moved the bill.
Second.
I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry.
I'll move it. Second.
All right, it's been properly moved by Mr. Fuatani, seconded by Mr. Fong. Secretary, please call the roll. On AB 2037. The motion is due pass. On to natural resources.
Bradford.
Aye.
Bradford, aye. Knight. No. Knight, no. Berry Hill. No. Berry Hill, no. Buchanan. Aye. Buchanan, aye. Carter. Aye. Carter, aye. Fletcher. Fong. Aye. Fong, aye. Fuentes. Fuller. Furatani. Aye. Furatani, aye. Huffman. Ma. Aye. Ma, aye. Skinner. Swanson.
Swanson, aye.
Swanson, aye. Valines.
Sorry, Mr. Perez, you do not have the required votes at this time, so we'll leave it on call until other members arrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. Our next bill is going to be AB 1947 by Assemblymember Fong. Are you ready? Mr. Fong, if you're ready, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. The California Solar Initiative, or the CSI program, authorized by Senate Bill 1 in 2006, set the goal of installing 3,000 megawatts of solar capacity by 2017. The program has been successful in offering customers incentives to install solar on the rooftop. However, it has been unable to provide solar power to a significant portion of ratepayers who are paying for the program but are unable to install solar on the rooftops. These customers may be renters or live in a condominium complex where the rooftop is not their own, or the property may be shaded, highly pitched, or oriented in the wrong direction to qualify for solar. Many ratepayers simply find rooftop solar to be cost prohibitive and therefore choose not to participate. AB 1947 is based on SMUD's highly successful Solar Shares pilot project. The Solar Shares program allows ratepayers who are interested in solar but are unable to install solar on the rooftops to participate in the CSI program by subscribing to shares of a larger solar system's output. Solar Shares participants pay a monthly fee in exchange for a portion of their electricity to come from locally sourced solar and receive a monthly credit on their electricity bill based on the solar system's expected output. All incentives available to CSI participants who install solar on the rooftop are also enjoyed by Solar Share participants on a proportional basis. By making solar available to all ratepayers within a publicly owned utilities boundary, AB 1947 will open a brand new market for solar energy systems that have thus far been unable to access solar. And by utilizing larger solar systems, the Solar Shares model builds more megawatts for less money, a savings of SB 1 funds that are then available for other solar projects. Mr. Chair and members, ratepayers who pay the SB 1 surcharge should all have an opportunity to participate in solar. AB 1947 provides that opportunity, and doing so opens an entirely new solar market and opportunity for further job creation. I respectfully request your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Fong. Is there any other support?
Mr. Chairman, members, Will Gonzalez on behalf of SMUD. This bill is a bill that requires publicly owned utilities to do nothing. It gives them the option to offer a different way of accessing solar. In the SMUD territory, over 40% of our residents are renters. In addition to that, some percentage of our population also has rooftops that, for whatever reason, pitch, orientation, shading, can't access solar. On top of that, we've got some percentage, unknown percentage, of folks who just don't have the capital or, are upside down in their mortgage or whatever it may be to finance solar on their rooftop. This bill simply gives the utility an option to help those folks access solar in a different way, to do it off-site, to choose how much they want, how much power they want to purchase from a solar system, and without all the issues involved with installing solar on your roof and maintaining that system. We're collecting the solar surcharge from all of our ratepayers, and yet we know at least 40, 50, whatever percentage, at least 40 can't participate in the program. I want to make clear a couple things. All the incentives that are available to a customer who wants to do solar on the rooftop is available to the customer and passed on to the customer under this program. Some folks have raised concern that this is just some scheme that we've come up with to charge customers a bunch of money and not give them the incentives that they would have otherwise. That's not the case. In fact, we also want to commit to strengthen the language if need to in the bill to make sure that it's clear that we are just passing on the incentives in a different way. It's not a perfect analogy, but I do like to compare this to buying versus leasing a car. Some people can't buy a new car, but could access that car at a much lower monthly rate if they leased it. In the end, no, they don't own it, but their monthly payment wasn't aimed at owning the system. It was just buying the power. They're getting the green power. They're taking advantage of the program that they're paying into. They're just doing it a different way rather than the rooftop. With me today is Rachel Wong with SMUD, who runs the Solar Shares program, to answer any questions you guys may have. Thanks.
Do we have any opposition towards the bill?
Really quickly, in support, Brett Barrow with the California Municipal Utilities Association. We feel this will provide access to those who can't access solar for not only SMUD ratepayers, but other of our member agencies who may mimic these types of programs. Thank you.
Chairman, my name is Bernadette Del Chiaro. I'm with Environment California. We're a nonprofit environmental advocacy group. I'm actually here with a neutral position right now. We appreciate the work that the author and sponsor have done to address some of our initial concerns. I'd like to raise some of those concerns right now. We still have a few. Just as background, Environment California was the sponsor of SB1, the Million Solar Roofs Initiative, and we worked very hard during those several years in passing that bill to sort of keep the utilities' hand out of the cookie jar, if you will, and to maintain a pot of money protected for consumers to go solar themselves. This is sort of the camel's nose under the tent, and we are fearful that it erodes that really strong protection that we have in SB1 to maintain the goal of building 1 million solar roofs that are owned by customers themselves. That is, in essence, the heart and soul of SB1 is to not just build 1 million solar roofs and create a mainstream market for solar, but to put solar in the hands of everyday people, and in addition to, outside of the typical utility structure. This program might not even be actually as cost effective as SB1. That's still a question I think the committee should explore. Under SB1, you have a fraction of the cost of going solar paid for by ratepayers through the surcharge, but then roughly up to two-thirds is paid for out of private dollars. So it's a public-private partnership, which is what enabled SB1 to have the bipartisan support it did back in 2006. This actually makes it so that the entire solar system is paid for by ratepayers, and really sort of changes the very nature of the program. The other thing to point out about the program, while I applaud SMUD's concerns about those who right now couldn't participate in SB1, the program as it's currently envisioned would actually sort of charge people that nobody would ever be able to save money under this program, in essence. They would pay a fee to participate in the program, and they would pay the surcharge to be to pay into the program. But nobody would ever own a portion of the system, which is one of the big, I think, problems with this bill, is it doesn't anticipate what happens after the system is paid for itself. Does the utility own it outright? Does a third-party contractor own it? What about all of those folks that have paid into the program and have been sharing into the program after the system's paid for itself? Do they ever get free electricity out of the deal? So I think that's one of the big problems. A couple of fixes that might start to get at this, in addition to articulating what happens after the system is paid off, is if the bill would allow individuals to do their own solar farms in addition to the utility company. So if there could be virtual net metering and solar farm aggregation that individual ratepayers could group together and do themselves, if that option was there, as well as the utility-owned system, that could get at sort of the heart and soul problem of SB1 and also the public-private partnership aspect of it. And the other points, some of these are smaller, but SB1 criteria should apply to this program, so the warranty and eligibility requirements. The rebate money, if it ever were to be applied to this program, should be limited to the first megawatt, just as it is in SB1 under private installations. And also, this program shouldn't affect the rebate levels for the rest of the participating customers. In other words, right now, because we have a rebate program, that the rebates go down as demand for solar goes up, so that we get ultimately down to a point where there's no more rebates needed. We wouldn't want to see this program set up to where it sort of gobbles up, if you will, the higher rebate levels, because you would assume a larger system would need a lower rebate anyway. So, if we get to this point, it shouldn't draw from the higher tiered rebates for individuals doing their own individual systems. And then last but not least, another thing that would make us actually in support of the bill is if it just didn't use SB1 funds at all, but rather if the utility wanted to build their own large-scale solar systems and allow customers to opt into it, just like a green power program might have done a few years back, where people could pay a surcharge every month to have 100% green power. This could be the same kind of thing, but again, not using up ratepayer funds that are intended for individuals to own their own solar system. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members, Donna Brownsey, representing the Solar Alliance, which is an organization of over 30 PV solar companies representing the supply chain of companies for PV solar. I think Bernadette did a great job of raising the issues that the Solar Alliance is also concerned about, the impact on SB1 and especially the cap and so we are not taking a position on the bill. We are hoping to work these technical issues out with the author and with the sponsors. We've been assured that we are going to have those conversations. So at this point, we don't have a position, but want to associate myself with Ms. Del Charo's comments on the measure. Thank you.
Thank you. I apologize. Any questions by my committee members here?
No, I'll move the bill.
Okay. Mr. Fletcher.
Yeah, thank you. Can you walk through who determines, because I feel like the one of the original intents, of the SB1 was to get individuals to put solar on their house so that you deal with transmission issues, a whole series of issues. And my understanding is a part of this is for houses that can't possibly put solar on their roof. They're in an area of shade or it's a roof. Who determines, yes, you are not technically able to put solar on your roof, so you can opt into this program or not? Like, I see the pictures in the stuff, and so like this house, like, okay, I can see why that doesn't get solar. But who makes that determination?
Rachel Wong, the Sacramento Municipal Utility. Thank you for the question. As SMUD designed the Solar Shares program, we basically designed it to address the needs of customers who currently have barriers. As such, though, we recognize that there are many different reasons why customers have barriers to adoption of solar. So we have not differentiated and said only you that have the skewed roof or the big tree are allowed to participate in Solar Shares, and if you have a perfect roof and you could have put solar on your roof, you cannot. So we haven't actually differentiated. We've designed the program to encourage customers who use less electricity, who have improperly situated roofs, to participate in the program, but we have not prevented them.
So there's nothing so if I have a house that is perfect for solar, I could still participate in this program?
Yes.
Doesn't that kind of get to the intent of like what SB1 was there to do, was to get people to put solar on their roofs?
Well, actually, so in SMUD territory, one of the big challenges for solar adoption is actually the fact that we have very low rates. And so I think the majority of our residential customers actually don't have payback periods within the 15-year time frame. And so we were looking for something that also encourages, for example, energy efficiency, which is very cost effective. But if you have a very energy efficient house, solar PV on your roof actually doesn't work well for you in a tiered structure where,
sure,
high rates are credited first. And so we actually did a subsidy where we subsidize lower energy users more. So we actually designed our program. We recognize that that might not be fully realized within the bill, but that's something that we're going to work towards to better differentiate. But we've actually designed the program to encourage those customers that have barriers to participate, even though we do allow participation as all. Now, if customers can make a good financial proposition of solar, they are large energy users, we actually subsidize them less. So it's not exactly as good of a financial proposition for them to participate in Solar Shares, and therefore would encourage them to put solar on their roof.
Okay, but a house that's perfectly suited for solar, that under the intent of SB1, they'd be encouraged to actually put that panel on their roof, could participate in this program, which would be paying for solar somewhere else, not on the rooftop.
Right.
Okay. Is there a flexibility, as was mentioned, in the price and the rebate? Because I think this is where a lot of us have a concern. That as solar prices change, that the subsidy and the rebate changes. So is your rebate set in stone and that's what it goes at, or is there flexibility to see this change as the price of solar changes?
No, the intent would be that the subsidy actually changes as the price of solar changes as well.
Okay, so the intent is, so written in the bill is it will be flexible and you'll determine, is that determination made in a similar way to the way the SB1 rebate is done? Like how does theirs fluctuate, and then how would yours fluctuate? How are they similar or different?
Well, if I understand the question, we're required to provide a subsidy that decreases over the 10-year period. So we already have, we already have a subsidy schedule that you can get online and look at it. It'll tell you today what it is, when that bucket is empty of megawatts, what the next rate will be. So and I think this is true in every utility. It's predetermined. It goes down over time over the 10-year period of the program. So that's where the flexibility comes in, and that it's predetermined.
Okay, so it's not based on the cost of solar; it's predetermined.
Well, so the way the SB1 incentive, as Will mentioned, there's 10 steps, and so all utilities are at certain steps. For example, SMUD is at $1.90 per watt currently for residential, and we're at, I think, $1.10 for commercial. So as each step has a capacity base gets used up, then it drops down to the next step. And the steps are required to drop by 7.5% on average per year until we get to a subsidy-free market by 2016. Now, how Solar Shares would work is we would basically, what we're proposing would be is that, okay, currently the residential retrofit step is $1.90 per watt. We recognize that there's some economies of scale from doing a larger scale system than a residential small scale system. So we would propose that we would take from the lower incentive step, which is the equivalent of what we would subsidize the customer, because we've got some economies of scale, versus taking from the current step of $1.90. But that $1.90 would be the threshold. We could not take anything above the $1.90. But ideally, based upon the cost savings savings that we could get, we will be working to develop some language in the bill to ensure that customers can actually get that economies of benefit scale.
Who owns the solar panels after they're built?
Currently, the way that SMUD did our first megawatt, which was our pilot project, is that it's a third-party owned power purchase agreement between a developer, Anexco, and SMUD. So we basically have a 20-year contract to buy all the power from the 1 megawatt system, which was built locally. So we will pay on a per kilowatt hour basis for the 20 years. So Anexco technically owns it. We just buy all the power from it. We buy it at high and we resell it to the customer low, taking that subsidy into consideration to lower the price for customers.
And then after the 20-year period, they maintain ownership of it?
Yeah, so I mean, the useful life of a system is about 25 years. The panels are warranted for 25 years, so the power purchase agreement is about basically the useful life of the system. If at the end of the 20 years, SMUD would either discontinue the contract, or if the system was still in good operational shape, we could renew the contract, but we would continue paying for the power ongoing from there.
My concern, I think, my kind of concern looking at this is I think the original intent was to help push markets to get in a place where folks can put them on their rooftops because of the distributive, I mean, all the different benefits of that. And so I think that there is a really compelling case to make for someone who can't participate in rooftop solar because of shading. These pictures I see on the front of your sheet here, roofs that are incompatible, shading, apartments, different things like that. I do think there's a compelling reason for that. My concern is that we're kind of extending it beyond that. And so folks who otherwise would put solar on their roof, might participate in this program. And I think that gets away a little bit of the intent of what that initial pot of money was made for. And so that's where I have some concerns and reservations on it.
If I can just add, and I don't know that it will change your mind, but one of the challenges SMUD was dealing with was the pictures that you have there. There's obviously the physical limitations, but we also have, given the economy and given where people are with home ownership, we have folks who just have problems with the capital cost of doing solar on your roof. And that's harder for us to say, okay, we will only allow people with bad solar roofs, that just don't work for solar to participate in this program. The reason we don't limit it in the bill is because how do we get to those folks who just don't have the $10,000 down or the credit to...
Right. But there are a lot of programs out there to help those folks, and there's a lot of creative ways to do things with property tax and other ways to give those folks some ability to get the upfront money. And I feel like what we're doing a little bit here, if it was just limited to homes that were incompatible, I'd say, hey, that's great. But I feel like we're getting away from the intent of what the original program was, just a little bit. And I get the cost thing, but when the program was initially designed, it wasn't put solar on your roof if you can afford it. I mean, it wasn't really done that way. So I'm sensitive to that, and I certainly understand where you're coming from, and I think it's reasonable. I just think, it kind of takes us away a little bit from where it was intended to go.
One thing I'd just like to add, we've actually talked about Solar Shares sometimes as solar training wheels. Solar Shares is a program that we've required customers to participate in for a minimum of 1 year, primarily because the credits from the solar generation are high in the summer and low in the winter, and we don't want someone gaming the system to, subscribe when it's high and then drop out when it's low. But after a year, a customer can choose not to participate. And so one of the benefits, I think, is that at a low monthly fee that customers can participate, they can actually choose to drop out anytime they want after a year. So they can try it out. And what we've been finding is, some customers, we did a customer survey about 6 months after we launched the program and found that, some customers who are in Solar Shares might want to actually put solar on the roof but aren't ready to make that commitment yet. So they're participating in Solar Shares right now, but they actually might be a really good rooftop customer in about a year or so. So I don't think it necessarily precludes that once a customer signs up in Solar Shares, they're in Solar Shares, they can't move to the rooftop. Right. Sometimes they just need a little bit of experience with what that looks like for them in order to make that decision, or wait until their financial proposition makes more sense.
Okay. That's it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Ms. Buchanan.
I have a number of questions and concerns. One is I agree with Assemblymember Fletcher. I think this goes counter to the intent of the Million Solar Roofs project, which was the intent to provide incentives for people to put solar on their homes. The other concern I have is that we're providing an incentive for municipal-owned utilities, but if someone is served, for example, by PG&E, there's not that same sort of incentive. And so, we're providing an incentive where in an area where rates are already low, and in areas where the rates are higher, we're not providing the same sort of opportunity. And I believe that, to the extent that you take it away from homes, there are areas like in Southern California where you want to have the solar put on the roofs to help clean the air and help them meet their AB 32 targets. So when I look at this, I look at the intent of the bill, and I look at what I would consider to be the equity issues statewide. It makes it very difficult for me to support this, even though I fully support your intent, because there are cities other than Sacramento that have difficulties putting solar on high-rise apartments or office buildings, or whatever. But they still do have homes where they can do that. And for homeowners, many of them need that incentive, because without it, as you say, I mean, the cost payback. In fact, many people are putting the solar on and aren't doing strictly for the cost payback, but the cost payback can be years. So those are my concerns, and why I'm at this point in time, not able to support that, despite the fact that, I commend your Sacramento Municipal District for all that you've done, and you've certainly been on the cutting edge in terms of meeting the renewable requirements and putting in new technologies and everything. But I truly do believe that the original bill was intended to put solar on the rooftops of basically, of homes, and to benefit all of Californians, not just those serviced by municipal utility districts.
May I actually just make a comment? You had mentioned that the municipally owned utility districts, you've got IOUs who do have high rates, and ideally that, people would be able to benefit. I think one of the challenges we see in the municipal utility district, because we have low rates, is that's why solar doesn't pay out. So in the IOU territory, where there are higher rates, it makes financial sense for them to go solar. I think there's some leasing models in PG&E territory, for example, where customers are already basically paying the same rate as electricity or even lower and making some money right away, which just isn't financially feasible in public-owned utility districts, or at least in SMUD territory. So that's been one of our things. The other thing, I appreciate your comments. The other thing that we tried to do to sort of avoid saying that we are very much in support of putting solar on roofs, and that's why actually we wrote the bill, so that it only carves out a certain percentage to address those that have challenges, versus saying, okay, all of SB1 is available for this, but actually just carving out a certain percentage.
But you agree that those same challenges exist in cities that are serviced by investor-owned utilities,
yes.
Right? Thank you.
Mr. Knight.
Just a couple little quick questions. One is the CSI program going to be successful by 2016? Are we going to get to 3,000 megawatts without this?
We are trying everything in our power to meet the goals that we have set in front of us. And we recognize that we have this goal, and we're working towards it. In terms of SMUD's ability to do so, it has been a challenge because of our low rates. We've actually had a couple of rate increases which have helped. But as mentioned, the majority of our customers, 90% of our residential customers don't have payback periods within 15 years, which makes it very difficult for us to achieve the goals. We've actually been we've been making progress on our SB1 goals, but a lot of that, at least in SMUD territory, has been coming from commercial installations more so than residential.
Okay. And, if we implement this program, we're going to be drawing money from the original pots of money, the higher rates, correct? Will that be drawing down on the money that was issued for this CSI program and pull it down a lot quicker? In other words, are we going to not achieve 3,000 megawatts with the $3.351 billion?
Well, ideally, given that we can get some economies of scale, we would ideally pull the incentives from some of the lower tiers, and there's been some concern of once we get to, SB1 incentives of 25 cents a watt or 65 cents a watt, will the administrative burden of actually, applying for the incentive overweigh the actual amount of dollars we can get? And so the hope is that instead of touching the pots of money that are at the higher levels, which would be available for residential retrofit, that by leveraging the economies of scale of some of these larger systems, we could actually pull from some of these lower incentive levels to help drive down the cost. And if we can install more solar sooner than later, then the hope is that that could actually help move the market to continue the trajectory of unsubsidized solar by the end of 2016, which we're very passionate about.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. Mr. Fortani.
My colleague, Ms. Buchanan, issued the word equity, and that's a concern I have relative to the CSI and the whole issue of solar, making sure that everybody has an opportunity to participate in the solar program. It has been evolving. I mean, we've had a bill dealing with a net metering where people are having solar panels on their roofs, and they're sort of developing their own little power companies at their homes because they're having production of power more than they can use, so they're being able to use a net metering process where they're benefiting from it personally. So I think this is an evolving process, and my concern is to make sure as many people have access to the solar possibility, and this is, I think, a very creative idea. I'm not saying it's the end-all, be-all by any means, but because of the way the bill's written, I like the fact that it's going to continue the opportunity. I happen to live in Los Angeles, and we're in the middle of a rate war right now between the city council and our LADWP. It's one heck of a battle. And the issue of how people are going to be able to access cheaper power is going to be critical. So initiating this relative to not only those of us that have homes where we can put solar on the roof, but people that live in apartment houses, et cetera, I think becomes a part of our challenge relative to making solar energy, green energy, equitable. I remember Mr. Fuentes, I think 2 years ago, had a bill that you were dealing with about putting solar panels on the top of apartment buildings so that those folks could have access. There's a difficulty relative to the billing and the metering, but still some way and somehow to come up with creative ideas. And this is a good one. I think this is a good opportunity for us to expand it, and I really support this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Fortani. Ms. Ma.
I was just wondering if someone can give me an update. I just got on this committee on how much has been done in terms of this million solar roofs. It says that the electric utilities will collect and invest about $3.3 billion over a 10-year period. So since this statute passed, like, what has been happening?
Well, it's a difficult question for us to answer because the municipal utilities run their own programs consistent with what the legislature passed, and then the investor-owned utilities run their programs and all their data is at the PUC. I can tell you for SMUD has been collecting the solar surcharge that funds this program since the inception of the program, and we've been making progress towards our share of the 3,000 megawatt goal, which I think our goal is 125 megawatts. So bad. So we have been marching towards our goal. I think we have probably, SMUD is very pro-solar. We've probably been doing better than most municipal utilities. We've been very aggressive about it. However, as mentioned by Rachel, we have a couple of issues. We've got rates that are significantly lower than other utilities, which makes it hard to convince someone to go solar. We also have the statute requires that incentive level to go down. As Rachel also mentioned, as that incentive level gets lower and lower, it becomes even more difficult to incentivize someone to go solar. So our primary purpose for introducing this bill is really twofold. I mean, one is the issue you're touching on is, are we making progress? Are we going to make that 3,000 megawatt goal? And the answer is we're doing our best, but it's getting harder and harder. But the other part of this is what Assemblyman Furutani is touching on, is we're collecting a lot of money from a lot of people who are never, ever going to be able to access solar. So we really see it as this creative program that takes care of these two problems that are becoming more and more difficult as we get further along into this 10-year program. And you know, your PG&E territory rates are somewhat more expensive, a little easier for PG&E to make progress towards their goal because the cost, the break-even point for a resident in your district may only be 5 years or 6 years, or it's 15 years in our territory. So it's a more difficult path for us than it is some other places in the state.
Okay.
So, are you fine? Mrs. Skinner.
Did you consider the option of having a program like this qualify towards your SB1 goals, but not using the SB1 funds to subsidize it? In other words, using your generation funds.
The answer is yes, it was considered. The challenge is we are already required by statute to charge our customers a solar surcharge. If we then were also going to take a portion of ratepayer dollars to fund a separate residential distributed generation kind of solar program, it's kind of a double hit on our ratepayers. We view the goal of SB1 was 3,000 megawatts of distributed generation. Whether it be on a rooftop or not, it seems to us that that's the right fund to draw from. We already are required by statute to be collecting this amount of money in that solar surcharge. It almost seems like we'd go backwards and we'd be even less equitable because now we're going to charge everybody again for a second program to do this model. I hear where you're going.
Except your ratepayers, you're still expecting them to pay into even this program. See, the data that I've seen, and it isn't in our materials, but the data that I've seen on your rate of whatever success towards your SB1 goals is quite high. So while it's true that your customers don't get as good of a financial deal because since their rates are lower, their payback takes longer, they are participating at almost the same rate that other utility customers are participating. And, maybe not as high as PG&E, but when I did the net metering bill and I looked at your participation rate, it's pretty high. So that's what I wondered, whether you would consider not using the SB1 funds to create these solar farms, but allowing yourself to get to meet your goals through it.
Well, I'll just speak a little bit with regards to our goals. I mean, SMUD is trying as much as possible to hit our goals, and that's why we have made progress. But as mentioned, actually a lot of our achievement of our goals, as you look at in terms of how many megawatts we've installed, we have had a number of very large commercial systems. And it's not to say that we're not proud of those, because we are. But, one of the things with Solar Shares and why we launched it initially with residential is really to find ways, perhaps back to the vision of million solar roofs or being able to have solar for everyone, is to be able to address the residential market as well. And we haven't been doing as well in our residential market.
I wasn't here when SB1 was written and passed, but to me there was no prejudice towards commercial in SB1. And the commercial under a program like SB1, in effect, makes much more sense because the commercial is going to be utilizing the solar at the time of generation. And so if we're looking at reliability issues, if part of our motivation to increase market share in solar is not only from in other words, we have the motivation of greenhouse gases, we have the motivation of environment, but we also have the motivation of reliability. And reliability is best served when the generation is on those facilities who are using it at the time of generation, which is the commercial facilities. So I don't think it's necessarily a negative at all that SMUD's most of its installation under SB1 is commercial. It makes a lot of sense.
Right. Well, I think that's why when we wrote this bill with regards to Solar Shares, we wanted to limit it to at the distribution level to be able to also help enhance and provide benefits at the distribution level as well.
Yes, Ms. Buchanan.
I said when I looked at the whole solar roof project is ramping up, but if I recall when I looked at the numbers and percentages for SMUD, they were as high or higher as the state as a whole.
Well, I know that...
so if you're ramping up at the same rate as the state, then I don't know why this is a problem.
I haven't looked at the statewide numbers. We look at PG&E because they're our neighbors, and I know that they're actually doing very well. So perhaps they're sort of the benchmark. But we're still I think we're at a little bit below 10% of our 125 megawatt goal. And I believe PG&E is probably closer to 15 or...
I just looked at the statewide in terms of numbers, in terms of percent, and if I recall correctly, you were either at or slightly above because they were all, everyone is at the ramped up stage.
There's no set aside between commercial and residential, so.
No.
Yeah, okay.
And not to belabor the point, but you also need to make sure you're looking at installed numbers versus just reserved, because there's a lot of reservations that happen and then they never get built because people. Okay.
The bill has been moved by Mr. Swanson. We need a second. Second by Mr. Fuentes. Mr. Fong, would you like to close?
Yes, the Sierra Club is in support because it maximizes local solar, and I'm committed to working with Environment California and Solar Alliance to work out our differences too. So I urge an aye vote.
Yeah, in my comments, I would only ask that you make the commitments which you just have to continue to work with the parties that have expressed their concerns, as well as my colleagues, and make sure that we maintain the spirit of SB1, and that if there are amendments that are going to go forth as we move, keep the committee informed of those changes as we go forward. It's been moved and properly seconded. It's been moved by Mr. Swanson, seconded by Mr. Fuentes. We need a vote. Secretary, call the roll.
Bradford?
Aye.
Bradford, aye. Knight? No. Knight, no. Berry Hill? No. Berry Hill, no. Buchanan? Carter? Aye. Carter, aye. Fletcher? No. Fletcher, no. Fong?
Aye.
Fong, aye. Fuentes? Fuentes, aye. Fuller? Furutani? Aye. Furutani, aye. Huffman? Ma? Aye. Ma, aye. Skinner? Aye. Skinner, aye. Swanson?
Swanson, aye.
Swanson, aye. Valines?
No.
Valines, no. That bill is out.
Mr. Fong, your bill is out 8-4 with a do pass motion and a re-referral back to Appropriation Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Skinner, are you prepared for 1954? Ms. Skinner, if you're prepared.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members. California's Renewable Portfolio Standard mandates that the state increase procurement from eligible renewable energy to 20% by 2010. AB 1954 will help us meet the RPS procurement targets in two ways. First, it fixes a financing problem with renewable energy projects, and second, it requires the creation of a consistent and reliable de minimis amount of fossil fuel that can be used in renewable energy operations. On the project financing, current law presumes that renewable energy developers responsible for financing transmission lines until either the CPUC or the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission determines that costs incurred are recoverable. This bill allows the CPUC to make a preliminary determination about transmission cost recoverability. This early determination saves renewable energy developers from having to secure more expensive or difficult to achieve financing for transmission lines. Nothing in the bill changes the criteria for rate recovery. The bill only changes at what point the determination is made. Regarding the de minimis fossil fuel standards, the California Energy Commission has the authority to determine what the de minimis rate should be for renewable energy operations. The current standard used by CEC is based on one technology that is not an accurate rubric for all renewable energy operations. AB 1954 would require the CEC to create a technology-specific de minimis standard based on reliability and output. This new standard would be tailored to the kind of technology being employed, therefore improving production and consistency. These simple but significant changes would go a long way towards promoting renewable energy and helping the us, meet the RPS goals. And here to testify with me is Steve Baker from the Large Scale Solar Alliance, and actually from BrightSource, and Arthur Harbenstock from BrightSource.
Mr. Baker, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Member Steve Baker with Aaron Reed and Associates representing BrightSource Energy. Thanks to the committee for considering this measure and to Assemblymember Skinner for bringing it forward. This is an important measure so that BrightSource can move forward on its large-scale solar project down in the Ivanpah area in the desert. As Ms. Skinner said, it would streamline the financing mechanism for transmission and adjust the de minimis gas usage so that large-scale solar companies can better fit their output to the system. We think that in the long run it'll mean less natural gas usage because you won't have as many peakers and whatnot going up and down to manage the load. Arthur Habenstock with BrightSource is here to answer any questions, and I know Ms. Niemela is also prepared to testify.
Mr. Chair and members, thank you for the time today. Aaron Niemela, representing the Large Scale Solar Association. We're the Association of Utility Scale Solar Developers, of which BrightSource is a member. I think Steve and the author said it all. Basically, 1954 doesn't do anything to change the criteria that are under consideration for which transmission lines should be approved. It simply changes the timing of that preliminary decision by the CPUC. It also requires that the de minimis fossil fuel standard not be a one-size-fits-all, allows the CEC to determine what technologies require what level of fossil fuel. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Lenny Goldberg on behalf of TURN for representing small ratepayers. We have had some discussions, and for the record, we don't yet have a position on the bill. We have had some discussions both about the cost recovery, which we think should work okay for ratepayers, and about the new fossil fuel standards, in which we have been discussing that with BrightSource, and we're hoping to reach an agreement. As we understand it, this bill goes to the Natural Resources Committee, and we will be discussing that issue there. Thank you.
All right, colleagues, there's any questions by any members of the committee? Any opposition? Not seeing any. Ms. Skinner, would you like to close?
Thank you. At a time when we have ERA recovery funds coming into the state and where projects need to break ground by December 31st, 2010 in order to access those funds, I think this is a good measure to assist that. And as I indicated before, make simple changes, so I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Move the bill, please.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Fuatani, seconded by Mr. Valines. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Swanson. Question.
And I just want to ask the author the issues, the questions that were raised by TURN. Those are ongoing discussions that are taking place.
Yeah, on the first point, TURN, I think, is satisfied that the cost recovery won't have a negative impact on ratepayers. But it's the second point, which is the issue of having technology-specific rubric for the forget the word now. Is the thing that we're discussing, and we'll continue the discussion so that we can come to a good place when it comes to natural resources.
Thank you.
Ms. Skinner, my only comment would be, again, just to continue working with the committee and those or the other organizations that might have concerns as we move forward. And if it is out today, we'll just continue the discussion of this bill. So it's been properly moved and seconded on AB 1954. Will you please call the roll? And it's a due pass to natural resources.
Bradford?
Aye.
Bradford, aye. Knight? Knight, aye. Berryhill? Berryhill, aye. Buchanan? Buchanan, aye. Carter? Carter, aye. Fletcher? Fletcher, aye. Fong?
It's non-fiscal and not going
Fuentes?
It's just a clarification.
Fuller? Fuller, aye. Furutani? Furutani, aye. Huffman? Huffman, aye. Ma? Ma, aye. Skinner?
Aye.
Skinner, aye. Swanson?
Swanson, aye.
Swanson, aye. Valines? Valines, aye.
Ms. Skinner, your bill's out 12-0. I just would like to correct the statement I made on motion AB 1947. It's just a due pass. It's not going to be re-referred back to appropriations. There's no fiscal impact. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Valines? Mr. Valines, you ready for 2561?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Proceed.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to speak to the committee today about Assembly Bill 2561, which seeks to eliminate the state's overlapping, competing, and duplicative energy regulatory entities and to create a single new California Department of Energy. This bill is a new, scaled-back version of our bill last year, ABX 3 or 3X, which this committee passed. With Mrs. Skinner and with Mr. Fuentes' help and support last year, I think we got to a good compromise on a bill, but frankly, we just couldn't get it all done. This year, we've scaled some of that back, working close with the governor's office, and hopefully we'll have success this year. Currently, our state's energy responsibilities are located in such a broad range of entities. Energy functions are fragmented, difficult to navigate, and oftentimes lack a clear line of leadership and accountability. This bill addresses these issues by consolidating the state's authority for energy policy and related functions into a newly created California Department of Energy, while maintaining critical public involvement through an energy commission structure. Headed by the Secretary of Energy, the California Department of Energy will consolidate the state's considerable technical energy expertise, develop and implement energy policies and programs, and continue providing technical support for licensing power plants and establishing building and appliance efficiency standards. Vesting the administration's authority for energy policy with the Secretary of Energy creates an identifiable center of accountability that will improve communications with the legislature, the public, the administration, and the federal government. There were some amendments suggested by staff and the committee. We're taking all of them. We agree with them. And I've got through the governor's office and through the agency, Mr. Maurer here as well to testify on the bill. And I would just say again that last year we actually did a pretty heavy lift and were successful on this side. And I'm hopeful that we can get this forward as a first step in trying to create some accountability and some, an ability for one person to be in charge of the energy issues, whoever he or she is as the next governor. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any support?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Chris Maurer. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Legislation for the Natural Resources Agency. As many of you will recall, last year when we heard Mr. Valines' AB 33XXX sponsored by the administration, it was a heavy lift. We were able, with the input from this committee, Ms. Skinner's Natural Resources Committee, the Appropriations Committee, the bill did get out of the full assembly last year, but as Mr. Valines said, we kind of ran out of time. This bill is a scaled-back version with regards to some of the provisions that were contained in last year's AB 33XXX are not in this bill, and so I want to distinguish those for you. With regards to transferring the bulk permitting bulk transmission line permitting authority from the PUC over to the new Department of Energy. That's not in this bill. With regards to expanding the exclusive jurisdiction of the state of the Department of Energy with regards to large solar PV and wind energy power plants, that's not in this bill. With regards to requiring the Department of Energy to create an expedited, i.e. 9-month siting process for preferable renewable power projects, that's not in this bill. And then finally, with regards to the provisions that were in last year's bill, the strategic transmission plan, that is not in this bill as introduced. However, as Mr. Valines indicated, we're happy to. Administration's fine with regards to those language. It was a good idea last year, and it's a good idea this year as well.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members, I'm Bob Raymer, Technical Director with the California Building Industry Association, in strong support of the bill.
Matthew Argo with the California Business Properties Association for all the reasons previously stated in strong support of the bill.
Keith Dunn here on behalf of the California Apartment Association, and for all the other reasons stated, strongly support the bill.
Move the bill.
Bill has been properly moved by Mr. Berryhill, seconded by Mr. Knight. Continue.
Yeah, Kent Cowles, PG&E, in support.
Brenda Coleman, California Chamber of Commerce, in support.
Okay. Is there any opposition to the bill? Or just concerns? And we'll hear those concerns right at this time.
Lenny Goldberg for Turn. We really did have many of the problems that were referred to in last year's bill that are not in this year's bill with regard to the overall direction that gets sent from the Department of Energy to the PUC, because we're very concerned about the PUC as a constitutional agency that has its own integrity with regard to energy policy. That is not in this bill. So the question of transmission, as I read this language, it's really to sit down and talk about it, as opposed to the other concerns that we had, which was the transferring of transmission from the Public Utilities Commission to the new Department of Energy. So with that, I think we're probably neutral on it and would look to maybe even get to a support position. There's some language that's removed in here from the old AB 1890 that we're very pleased to see is removed in here. So thank you for that. Thank you.
So it's my understanding, Mr. Goldberg, you're fine with the amendments that have been submitted.
That the amendments as submitted do not, as I understand them, they do not transfer transmission. They continue the discussion we've been having for the last 15 years or so.
Okay. All right. So we have a motion for AB 2561. It's a due pass with a referral back to Natural Resources. I'm sorry. Colleagues that have comments at this point. I'm rushing along here. Mr. Huff.
Could perhaps the witness speak to the cost of this reorganization and how that is going to be picked up?
Well, we fully expect that there'll be efficiencies realized with regards to absorbing the, we're going to be absorbing the Department of Community Services and Development, as was contained in the bill last year. We'll be absorbing programs currently within the State Architect's Office, Department of General Services, Office of Planning and Review. We fully expect to absorb those, and as we see duplications and efficiencies, those efficiencies will be achieved. It won't happen overnight, but we fully expect that to occur in due course as we review these programs.
I just haven't seen a lot of specific analysis about the relative benefit of those hoped for efficiencies versus the transition and reorganization cost. Am I missing something? Or?
Well, I would just add to that two things. We made the argument last year that there actually would be these efficiencies brought in, would probably be a cost savings. It wasn't the driver of the bill. It's a very fair question, though. The truth is it was more about accountability, and so we hadn't focused as much on the cost savings, although I think they will be there because you're basically absorbing some of the government functions. I don't think we have a hard number for you, but we should probably get something. But it really was more about accountability. And this is the classic bill that, last year we tried to do a lot, and we're doing a compromise with a lot less this year.
Well, I'm sure Mr. Fuentes' committee will have something to say about that.
He's a co-author. I hope it's a good thing.
He'll have to recuse himself. Question: could somebody tell me how the current chair of the Energy Commission is selected?
The current chair of the Energy Commission is selected by the governor. The statute.
There's no change in the chair selection from the current commission.
Oh, no, sir.
Okay.
No, sir.
That was just the other question.
And with regards to the vice chair is also chosen by the governor every 2 years.
Very good. Thank you.
Ms. Skinner.
Thank you. Last year, when we dealt with this bill, I had concerns regarding there's a variety of funds that are granted in some cases or distributed via commission functions that the original bill, and I realize that we're dealing with another one now, had completely within the purview of the administration, meaning the new administration that's being established, and not via the board and a public process. And so the last year's bill was amended in natural resources, but I understand that in the way those amendments were written, inadvertently put the responsibility back in the code to the Energy Commission when in fact there isn't going to be this is changing that whole structure. So the point of my question is, would programs like the peer grants, like other programs where funds are administered, would they, under this bill, be given through the public process and through the board, the newly constituted board as described here?
That is correct. The board would have to adopt specifically with regards to peer funding. Again, the department would develop the programs, the criteria, the actual funding would be approved by the board in a public process. Same thing with regards to the renewable energy programs, those dollars. Same thing with regards to the IPER. The IPER would be developed by the department. However, it would be ultimately adopted by the board, and those would occur in a full public process, vetting process, and a vote by the majority of the Energy Board members.
And the efficiency programs that some of which are administered by Energy Commission now, some of which are administered by the community
CSD.
Yes, that is now being merged into this.
I'd have to look at the language to see if that was taken care of. However, that would be our intent as well. I mean, we wanted to honor our commitment to you with regards to the concerns that you had and the committee had last year in Natural Resources Committee. However, as you mentioned, the amendments that were taken sort of to pull all that stuff back out, and we had a situation where we had the Department of Energy, the Energy Board, and the Energy Commission. So what we did was we went back and we clarified those provisions to make sure that those funding decisions were adopted by the board as opposed to the secretary on his or her own volition.
Right.
And we hope that, well, first of all, it was our commitment last year, and that was a big deal with Mr. Chesbro and everybody else, you included. We were happy to do that. If we didn't somehow fix it here, it'll be fixed by the time we go to Natural Resources for sure. But I think we got it fixed right, but we wanted to make sure that we kept those the way they were.
Okay.
And I'll review that too. I'll get back to you on that.
I will admit that given the break, I did not, and the size of the bill, I did not read it over break. So
well, I was sharing with my colleague, Mr. Fletcher, that most of those are strikeouts in the bill. So, where there was a lot of work, we're actually toning it down quite a bit. But, so you're okay. You read it all last year.
Any more comments from members? Hearing none, Mr. Valines, please close.
Well, Mr. Chair, I just appreciate the chance to present the bill. I frankly appreciate the work of both sides of the aisle in this committee last year and this year, and I appreciate our co-author, Mr. Fuentes, and Ms. Skinner's work last year, and I'm hopeful that we'll get it through both houses and to the governor this year and make a step forward. Not as big a step, but a good step.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion on the floor for AB 2561, do pass as amended, with the referral back to Natural Resources. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Bradford?
Yes.
Bradford, aye. Knight? Knight, aye. Berryhill? Buchanan? Buchanan, aye. Carter? Carter, aye. Fletcher? Fletcher, aye. Fong? Fuentes? Fuentes, aye. Fuller? Fuller, aye. Furutani? Furutani, aye. Huffman? Huffman, aye. Ma? Ma, aye. Skinner? Swanson?
Swanson, aye.
Swanson, aye. Valines?
Aye.
Valines, aye. Berryhill, aye. Bill's out 13-0.
The bill is out, Mr. Valines, 13-0, do pass as amended with a referral back to Natural Resources.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am now going to lift the call to members on AB 2037, the Perez bill. For those who missed the vote, please vote at this point.
Fuentes? Fuentes, aye. Fuller? Fuller, no. Huffman? Huffman, aye. Skinner? Skinner, aye. Valines? Valines, aye. The lines, no.
Excuse me, members. AB 2037 is out 10 to 7. Is that 10 to 4? And I'm going to leave the call open for another 5 minutes for those members who might still have desire to add on. After that, we will adjourn.